The thing I wanted to ask you about is the point of contention in international law, because the Russians are saying that they're recognizing LPR and DPR under the right to self-determination. They're using that argument under international law. And then the West and NATO are saying that Russia's violating Article 2, Paragraph 4, territorial integrity of Ukraine. How do you reconcile these two? Who's right in this case?
Well, this is where international lawyers come in. I mean, we saw the same kind of, ridiculous discussion going on when the United States went into Iraq, as to whether it was an invasion or it was, a necessary operation to get rid of weapons of mass destruction. It was an invasion. It was an invasion. End of story. The Russians, of course, can't come right out and say we're violating international law. No nation's going to say that.
Right.
So they're going to develop a line of legalistic argumentation that paints what they're doing differently. They should be able to do it. I mean, look, Putin's already said that the government that's in Kiev is an illegitimate government. It came into power from a coup. He's used some very crafty language when referring to them, not as an official government, but as those who came into power from an illegal coup, et cetera. So by doing that, you eliminate legitimacy on the part of the Ukrainian government. And so what you have instead is a Nazi regime, an illegal regime, and maybe through an expansion of peacekeeping, it's necessary to eliminate that. I'll let the Russian diplomats and lawyers twist this any way they want to. But I think if we're going to condemn the United States for violating international law through the invasion of Ukraine or of Iraq, we have to be consistent. It doesn't mean that Russia is evil. Doesn't mean anything. It just means that international law it doesn't know how to deal with an institution like NATO. I mean, NATO exists outside the framework of the United Nations Charter. NATO exists outside the framework of international law. Where were all these people who were concerned about international law when NATO created the nation state of Kosovo, stripping it away from the Serbian nation because some Albanian Kosovars said, we want to be independent. Well, Russia took that, and Putin at the time said, you guys are making a horrible mistake. This is going to come back and bite you. Well, it just did, because Russia used the exact same playbook to create Lugansk and Donetsk, the exact same playbook. So no one in the West can literally have any credibility. And then where was the world when the United States invaded Iraq? Where was the world? Where was the condemnation? Where was the angst and the anxiety? Russia just took the same playbook and they're doing it better. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Russia is operating in total conformity with international law. They're not. What I am going to say is that international law, as it's currently configured, is not up to the task of dealing with the situation. Because if Russia were to abide strictly by international law, then NATO would get away with everything that Russia says represents an existential threat to their existence.
And Putin is saying he's saying that our objective is not to occupy Ukraine. Do you believe that he's right? What about the Minsk agreements? What of the Minsk agreements? Are those even relevant anymore?
Well, Minsk is no longer relevant. I mean, the Ukrainians had 7 years to save their country. They opted out, partly because the United States, Germany, France, Great Britain didn't put enough pressure on them. And indeed, in the end, took the Ukrainian side saying that, well, Minsk is unfair. Well, then you shouldn't have signed it. But, the bottom line is you needed to implement Minsk. It was only too late. I mean, watching Tony Blinken speak before the United Nations Security Council, and we are pushing the Ukrainians to implement Minsk. Well, the Ukrainians turned around and said, we're not going to do it. Okay, you made your bed. Now you got to sleep in it. That means that you don't exist anymore. Minsk is gone. Now that doesn't mean that there can't be a new Minsk afterwards. I mean, when this is all said and done, I do believe that the Russians don't want to occupy Ukraine. That would be a disaster. The last thing the Russians want to do is create the legitimacy for an insurgency. They're going to terminate this government. They're going to demilitarize Ukraine, and then they're going to put in place a new government that will create a new military that is more along the lines of the Belarusian military, meaning that it will cooperate with the the Russian military, etc. But Russian troops will secure the Ukrainian border for a while, but they're not going to occupy Ukraine. I believe that because that's not in Putin's interest. But Ukraine is not going to exist like it currently exists. You know, that Ukrainian ambassador to the UN raising hell and havoc right now, he's gone.
Right.
He represents a dead government. That government's gone. There will be a new government, a new constitution, a new conception of what Ukraine is. And what Ukraine will be is part of this, it'll be a Slavic rump state that is subordinated to the will of Moscow, much like Belarus is.
Well, what do you think is going to happen next? I know this is pure speculation, but just given, the situation that NATO is in, the state that it's in, we do have still 5 countries surrounding Russia, 5 NATO countries. Someone might ask, what's the point of just going after Ukraine? You're already surrounded. It's too late. Do you think that Putin is just trying to create leverage in order to get NATO not just to forswear Ukraine, but to, as we mentioned, to not deploy NATO troops in the neighboring countries?